Well, Janice Brooks was working on the 84th floor of the South Tower when the first plane hit the North Tower, and then everything unfolded for her. Janice, so good to speak to you this morning in a way that I'm sure in your everyday life you don't want to be thinking about that day, but I'm sure it's with you every step.
Good morning. Yes, hello, welcome. It's one of those things, Kate, that I can close my eyes and be back there in an instant. The sights, the sounds, the smells. But now, all these years later, I have a bit more of control of my emotions, and I'm able to, it's surprising how many times I will look at the clock and it will be 9:11. So the universe is conspiring to not let me forget, as if I ever would. But it's one of those things that I'm a bit more in control of now.
So you were on the 84th floor. How did you know of the South Tower? How did you know that something had happened? Did you feel it? Did you see it? Were you told that the North Tower had been hit?
Basically, what happened, I worked for a company called Eurobrokers, and our office was on the 84th floor of 2 World Trade, the South Tower. On the day, there was a dull thud. I remember running around to speak to Brian and said, what's happening? I saw paper and dust through the window. I looked down on the Statue of Liberty, so this was all happening behind me. Brian said he would investigate. I went back to my desk, carried on with the morning, really, and then suddenly a man's voice, everybody out at the top of his lungs. I stood up, took a couple of steps away from my desk, but then decided to ring London because Gil, my boss from New York, had gone to London the day before. I called London. We couldn't find Gil. He was in a meeting, so I spoke to Robin. Now, I'd just left London 19 days before, so Robin was my boss for the 10 years I'd worked for the company. And I very casually said to him, hey, Rob, just to let you know, something's happening, not too sure what it is, and I'm going to, I'm leaving. Him screaming at me at the top of his voice, something's happening next door. Janice, a plane's hit the building. Get out of there. Him, his voice full of panic, full of concern, full of worry, full of complete shock. Here is a guy who's, 3,000 miles away from me, watching this on TV, telling me what's happening less than 200 yards away from where I'm standing. And he was the one that actually got me going. The urgency in his voice made me leave or start to leave.
So you ran down to the 70th floor and then were told by the authorities there, who were also presumably like you, trying to piece together what was actually happening, told to go back up.
Absolutely, there was an announcement. We have been asked not to evacuate 2 World Trade Center. The space on the plaza is being used for those evacuating 1 World Trade Center. Please return to your office. So, they said that the elevators would start momentarily. So we, by this stage, was in a lift lobby, waiting. The elevators didn't come back on, and suddenly someone said, "Come on, let's start walking." Of the group that I was with, there was probably about 8 of us. 2 of the guys, Paul and Bobby, took off running. I tried to keep up, and I remember shouting out, "Hey, wait for me." And Paul said, "Come on, old woman." He turned into the stairwell, and I'd never see either of them again.
Because the plane then hit your tower, and it hit between the 77th and the 85th floor, wiping out your floor, where you had been working just minutes before, and if you could have run faster, wiping out you as it did the people you were with.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we were by this stage in the World Trade Center. You come out of the fire exit, you go into a connecting corridor, out one door, into the corridor, and then rejoining the staircase. I was one of the last people of the group. There were about 8 of us. Just a huge thudding, crashing sound. The ceiling came down, the grid, dust everywhere. The lights were flickering on and off. Of the other group, a couple of the people fell to the floor. I was kind of jostled against the wall, coughing. Lights then went off. People started screaming and crying, really not knowing what's happening at that time. Eventually, the dust settled. The lights came back on, which was amazing. And through the door that we were heading towards, a gang of people then came back in. And one of the guys said that They heard a loud whooshing sound and looked up to see a fireball coming towards them, and it smashed all the windows. That's why, as they were running back to the door, they were covered in glass. And one of the other guys said that they thought that the other building had fallen into us.
See, at that time, people in the outside world were starting to understand that this is likely terrorism once the second plane hit the South Tower. But you were completely in the dark to this. I presume for you this is just, there's something going on, we have no clue what's going on, we have to get out. But with no stairwell, how did you get out?
I think with the guy saying that the building had toppled into us made complete sense, really. We then, the door that we tried to go back down, the door that we just come through, the guys cleared the debris, and as we looked down, there was no stairs. It was just blackness and flames. Magically, there was another door that was flush with the wall, the exact same colour. You would never know it was there. No handle, but you pushed a little button and the handle popped out. The guys all cleared the debris, were able eventually to open that door, and one by one we did get through. We walked into a corridor that was brightly lit, water gushing down. There was a water pipe gushing water. There were surprisingly Coke bottles burst and scattered everywhere. I remember thinking that was probably a vending machine somewhere that had exploded. And just a couple of the guys, there were probably about 12 at this point because 6 came through from the up door. A couple of guys took off running, but there were probably about 8 to 10 of us kind of like, just slowly making our way down. After a little while, you would never know anything would happen. It was just, the lights were on, no dust by that stage. We saw 3 firemen walking up, full of gear, kind of looked us up and down, just probably noticed that we were walking wounded, but then they carried on up.
I presume when you left the building, I suspect there was at that point a sigh of relief that you were now safe. But of course you weren't, because the towers were going to come down. What did you do immediately? Did you stand? I think the natural response would be sort of stand and watch what was going on.
In shock.
Or did you get out of the area?
That's what everyone was thinking, actually. I happen to live in Battery Park City, which is just across the highway from the World Trade Center. My commute was all of 10 minutes. Lower Manhattan was being evacuated. They were pushing everyone over the Brooklyn Bridge. The guy that I was with said, like, where do you live? And I said, look, I live just over there. And I pointed to my apartment block. So we made our way back. At one point, as we turned around the corner, I looked up at the towers for the first time, and where our floor should have been, there was a huge gaping hole, and I could see flames, and I could see bits of building falling down. I eventually got back to my apartment, and I was there when both the buildings fell.
How was that moment to see it? I mean, you knew at that point already, I presume, that you had lost colleagues and peers and friends. It must be a surreal experience to see a building that you were in with people that you loved and cared about were in it, just standing there from your apartment. Unbelievable, disembodying almost, I would suspect.
Absolutely. It was one of those things. I was on the 17th floor. There was windows all around the apartment. So one side I could see, the harbour, the boats, beautiful. Everyone talks about the impossibly blue sky that day, a beautiful September day in New York. One side of my building was lovely. And when I looked out the other side, there was, one by one the buildings fell. And it was death and destruction. And yes, I thought of the last people that I saw on the floor. And I think, had hoped that as I was leaving, other people were leaving as well.
And you, in your apartment, the dust from that fall, you were besieged, weren't you? I think waist deep in and around your area, as so many areas were. Today must be an impossible day. There are so many things you must reflect on. The fact that it was only 19 days before you'd taken this incredible job to go there. Now, the people that you've lost and the fact that you're back here in the UK. How will you be marking tomorrow? What will you be thinking about?
Eurobrokers lost, the final count came to 60 people on the day, and John died a couple of weeks later. So the final tally for Eurobrokers was 61 people. I'd worked for the company for 10 years before I moved to New York, and so many people had worked in London. So not only did I know the people, but I knew their families, I knew their children. That's why I do this, just to mark the day, but more importantly, to remember my friends. It's never easy. The years, even now, don't get any easier on the day, but you know, time's a great healer, and it's not the first thing I think of every single morning. Marking the day, I represent a small charity called Since 9/11, whose remit is education, and I go into schools and talk and tell my story. They're having a reception at the Olympic Park tomorrow they brought over actually 2 pieces of steel from the building, one from the North Tower, one from the South Tower, and they're having a reception there tomorrow. So that's where I go. I had really intended on going to New York, but obviously I can't get there at the moment. So I think that's the best place for me to go to mark the day and to really remember my friends.
Janice, thank you for sharing your story with all of us. We remember your friends and all those who passed away, and all those loved ones of those who passed away 20 years ago. I can't quite believe how the time has passed on that one. Thank you for so eloquently coming and telling us what happened. It makes it very vivid for all of us.
Reminding those who weren't there, that are too young, what really happened. It's wonderful to hear your story, albeit obviously terribly, terribly sad as well, but important to remember. Good to talk to you, Janice.